Before time carried names, before rivers were drawn into maps or mountains numbered in mind, the land breathed its own sacred rhythm. Mist lifted from deep valleys as if the earth were exhaling prayers. In that blue, breathing world lived the Cherokee, Ani Yunwia, the principal people, whose story begins not with conquest, but with communion. Their first inheritance was not wealth or weapon, but relationship, to soil, to wind, to fire, and to the mysterious heart that beats within all living things. Their home lay in the southern reaches of the great Appalachian Spine, ridges older than any empire, peaks softened by time until they seemed to float in haze. To outsiders, these were merely wooded slopes, but to the Cherokee, they were a living body. The mountains were the earth's bones, the rivers its veins, the fog its spirit moving between worlds. When dawn spilled through the trees and the mists turned silver, the people said the Creator, Unitlanvi, was breathing light back into creation. Generations lived and died among these folds of green. Villages clung to the bends of rivers, Kituwa, Kowe, Chota, Tanasi, names that carried the hum of flowing water. Paths linked one valley to another like the threads of a woven cloth. Life moved with the seasons, slow and circular. Planting followed the warming rains. Hunting followed the leaf fall. Ceremonies followed the full moons. In every gesture, the people sought balance. They believed that harmony, Duyuktov, was not a moral choice but the law that kept the universe from tearing apart. They told how, in the beginning, everything was water. Only when the great water beetle dove into the depths and brought up a mouthful of mud did land appear. The mud spread and hardened until hills and valleys took shape. Over this newborn earth the animals scattered. When the sun first rose, its warmth brought color and voice to the world. From that same dawn, the Cherokee traced their lineage. Children of light and soil, breathing between sky and underworld. At the center of each town burned a flame that echoed the first sunrise. The sacred fire was never allowed to die. Women tended it, feeding it cedar and oak, whispering songs of gratitude. It was said that the spark of this fire came from Kituwa, the mother town, and that each village flame was a child of that original light. Fire was life made visible, heat, spirit, and transformation bound together. Around it, decisions were made, marriages blessed, disputes healed. Even war parties carried coals from it so that the spirit of the homeland would walk beside them. The people oriented their lives to the four directions. East was the place of beginnings, where the sun rose and hope returned. South carried warmth and growth, the season of youth. West belonged to endings, to ancestors, and the wisdom of dusk. North held the winds of testing, the necessary cold that made strength meaningful. To live rightly was to stand in balance among these powers, neither favoring nor rejecting any, for each completed the circle of existence. Within this sacred geography, the story of Selu was born, the oldest of all Cherokee teachings. Long ago, when humans were few and the world still shimmered with newness, there lived a woman named Selu and her husband Kanati, the lucky hunter. Everything they needed was provided. Game appeared wherever Kanati set his traps, and when hunger came, Selu stepped into her small house and returned with baskets brimming with corn and beans. Her family never saw her gather them. They only saw the miracle of her return, arms full of food as if the earth itself had opened to her. Their son, curious and impatient, wanted to know her secret. He and his friend, the mischievous twin who would later ride with the thunder, peered through a crack in the wall. What they saw filled them with awe and fear. Selu stood in quiet prayer, moving her hands across her body. From her breast fell kernels of golden corn. From her blood came beans. From her palms, squash. Life flowed out of her in sacred offering. She was the earth made flesh, feeding her children from her own being. When she learned they had spied on her mystery, she knew her time in human form was over, but she did not curse them. She called them close and spoke with tenderness. "My sons," she said, You have seen what no one should see, yet I will not leave you hungry. Clear a circle of ground in the sunlight. Drag my body across it 7 times, and from the place where I lie will rise the plants that will feed you forever. Remember me in your planting. Speak to me in your harvest, for I will live in the corn that bends to the wind." They obeyed her. From the soil where her spirit entered the earth, green shoots lifted. The first corn rose, followed by beans and squash, the 3 sisters whose vines and stalks entwine like family. Ever since, the Cherokee have honored Selu as the Corn Mother, the first provider. Corn is not merely food, it is a covenant, a promise between people and the land. Every grain is a prayer answered, every harvest a remembrance of the mother's gift. When the time of the green corn ceremony arrives each summer, the people renew that covenant. Fires are extinguished in every home, hearts are cleansed of bitterness, and all gather at the council ground. At dawn, a new flame is kindled by the priests using the friction of cedar wood, the same way the first fire was made when the world began. As its smoke rises, cornmeal is sprinkled into the blaze, an offering of gratitude. Songs fill the air, drums echo like thunder rolling through the hills, and dancers move in circles that mimic the path of the sun. Old wrongs are forgiven. The world is made new again. The ceremony is not spectacle, it is rebirth. It reminds the people that life depends on giving as Selu gave, on balance as the seasons balance light and shadow. In the hush that follows the dance, when only the crackle of the new fire remains, elders tell again the stories of the beginnings. They speak of the water spider, Kanene, the smallest of creatures who once carried a burning coal across the water to bring fire to humankind. They speak of Kanati, the hunter, who taught respect for all living things and warned that waste would anger the spirits. Through story, the children learn that even the tiniest act, a spark carried, a kernel planted, holds the weight of creation. The rhythm of Cherokee life moves like a heartbeat through these tales. Plant, harvest, feast, forgive, begin again. In every repetition lies renewal. Their villages breathe with the land. Fields of corn stretch beside clear rivers where women wash baskets woven from river cane. Smoke curls from round-roofed council houses. The laughter of children mingles with the cry of hawks overhead. Nothing here is accidental. Every motion is part of the sacred circle that Selu began. As the years turned and the corn ripened in endless cycles, the Cherokee grew to see the land not as something they possessed, but as something that possessed them. Their homes, their language, their ceremonies, all were rooted in this earth. When a child was born, the umbilical cord was buried near the family's home so that the child would always belong to that place. When someone died, the family sang them back into the soil, believing that their spirit flowed into the streams and trees to nourish new life. The world was alive with kinship, everything breathed together. To outsiders, it might have seemed simple farming and forest life. But beneath every act was a layer of meaning as deep as the mountains themselves. Before entering the river to fish, one spoke to the water. Before cutting a tree, one explained the need. When the hunters prayed, they did not ask for success but for forgiveness, asking the deer to offer itself willingly. Every hunt was a ceremony, every meal a thanksgiving. To live rightly was to remember that nothing truly belonged to you. It was only borrowed from the living world. Among the people, the women were the keepers of the earth's wisdom. They were called Selu's daughters, inheritors of the Corn Mother's sacred knowledge. They planted the fields, controlled the clans, and held the right to declare war or peace. Lineage followed the mother's line, not the father's. A child belonged to its mother's clan, for she was the one who carried life. The world itself was shaped by this understanding. The soil gives birth, the woman gives birth, and from both flow the abundance that sustains all. Cherokee society was built around 7 clans: wolf, deer, bird, paint, blue, longhair, and wild potato. Each clan carried its own responsibilities and sacred stories. The Wolf Clan were protectors. The Bird Clan held songs that guided prayers skyward. The Paint Clan mastered healing and ceremony, using color as medicine for the spirit. These clans wove together like strands of a basket, no single one above the other. Each completed the whole. The 7 clans mirrored the 7 directions of the Cherokee world: north, south, east, west, above, below, and center, the sacred point of balance where all powers meet. At the heart of their belief was a truth that echoed Selu's sacrifice, that creation is never free. Something must give for life to continue. Just as Selu gave her body for food, so the hunter gave thanks for the life he took, and the people gave offerings to the soil for what it returned. It was not guilt, but gratitude that guided them, a recognition that the world thrives on sacred exchange. This balance was fragile, easily broken by greed or pride. The old stories warned of what happens when harmony is lost. They told of the time when humans began to kill more animals than they needed. Angered, the animals gathered in council deep within the mountains. The bear spoke first, his voice low as thunder. "We must punish the humans," he said, "for they take our flesh without respect." The deer agreed, deciding that from that day on, if a hunter killed without ceremony, he would be stricken with pain. Even the fish and birds made laws of vengeance. It was the plants who took pity on humankind. "When they fall sick," the plants said, "we will offer ourselves as medicine." So from that time, every sickness had a cure hidden in the forest, if one approached it with reverence. The moral was clear. Only humility could keep the world in balance. In the evenings, when the air turned cool and the sky glowed orange behind the ridges, stories drifted like smoke across the villages. Elders told the children of Anivdakwaloski, the thunder beings, who dwell in the dark cloud houses above the western mountains. They are not gods, but powerful spirits who bring the rain. When lightning strikes, it is their fire falling to renew the earth. Each clap of thunder is their drum, beating life into sleeping seeds. The people prayed to them before the planting season, offering tobacco and song to invite gentle rains rather than storms. These teachings, woven from wind, fire, and soil, formed the unseen structure of Cherokee life. They were not written in books or carved in stone, but passed from mouth to ear, generation to generation, like a continuous heartbeat. In every child who listened beside the evening fire, the old world lived again. The stories carried not just entertainment, but instruction. How to live without breaking the harmony Selu began. The seasons spun in sacred rhythm. Spring brought planting and renewal. Summer filled the valleys with green and music. Autumn painted the ridges in gold and crimson, and winter folded the world into silence, the season of stories. Each turn of the year reminded the people of the circle, life into death, death into life, forever returning. Even the number 7, sacred to the Cherokee, reflected this truth. 6 directions and the 7th center, the eternal point that never moves. To live at that center was to live in peace. When the morning mists lifted from the mountains, elders would stand facing east and whisper the first prayer of the day. May the sun rise clear, may the corn stand tall, may our words be straight, may our hearts remain clean. It was a simple invocation, but it carried all the weight of their cosmology: purity of heart, honesty of word, gratitude for the land. In that single prayer lived the essence of what it meant to be Ani Yunwia, the real people. Even the smallest village was a universe in miniature. The square ground at its center mirrored the shape of the cosmos. The council house, round and domed, represented the womb of the earth. The sacred fire inside burned with 4 logs placed in the directions, each feeding the next. Above, the smoke hole opened to the sky, symbolizing the path of prayers. When the fire crackled and sparks rose into the night, the people believed their ancestors were listening. Time itself was a circle, and the living and the dead were never far apart. So when a child asked, "Where do we come from?" The answer was not told with distant stars or faraway gods. The answer was whispered in the rustle of corn leaves, in the call of the whippoorwill at dusk, in the warm breath of the wind. "We come from Selu," the elders said. "We come from the earth who loved us enough to feed us with her body." There is a saying among the Cherokee, "The land remembers." It means that every sound, every prayer, every heartbeat ever given to the soil still echoes beneath the moss and roots. The rivers carry it. The wind hums it through the valleys. To walk through the Smoky Mountains, the Unica, or the Blue Ridge is to step into living memory, a memory older than stone, older even than the people who now bear the name Ani-Yunwia. Those ancient mountains, veiled in mist and rain, were once thought to be alive. The Cherokee called them Chaconage, place of the blue smoke. The soft haze that rose from the forests was the breath of the earth itself, a spirit exhaling from the lungs of creation. Every ridge, every waterfall had a name and a story. Some mountains were home to spirits, others were pathways for the dead. Sacred places dotted the land like constellations turned inward. There was Ketua, the mother town, where the first sacred fire was lit, the origin of the people. There was Nikwasi, whose mound still rises near the Little Tennessee River, a place of ceremony and law. And there was the ancient town of Akota, the beloved city, where the eternal flame burned through centuries of peace and war. At Ketua, the people gathered for the green corn ceremony, one of the holiest of their calendar. It marked renewal, both of crops and of spirit. When the corn had reached its full height, but before the first ears were harvested, the priests extinguished every fire in the village. Only one flame was kept alive, the sacred fire at the center of the town. From it, the new fires would be rekindled in every home, symbolizing purification and balance restored. No one could eat of the new harvest until they had cleansed their hearts and reconciled with their neighbors. For 7 days they fasted, danced, and prayed. Old grudges were forgiven. Debts were erased. The people were reborn with the new corn, just as the earth was renewed. This ceremony was more than ritual. It was a living reenactment of the myth of Selu. When the people ate the first corn, they were not just tasting food, they were remembering her sacrifice. Every kernel was her gift, every stalk a strand of her hair reborn. To eat with gratitude was to honor the corn mother. To waste or hoard was to betray her. The sacred fire in the center represented her heart, the flame of life that continues through every generation. In the Cherokee tongue, the sacred fire was called Atse Utsi, the fire above, mirroring the sun's eternal presence. Fire was male, corn was female, the union of sun and earth. Together they sustained existence. This duality ran through every part of Cherokee philosophy: male and female, day and night, sky and soil. Neither was dominant. Each balanced the other. When imbalance came, through conflict, selfishness, or broken vows, disease or misfortune followed. To live in harmony, Duyuktuv, was to walk the middle path. The Cherokee saw Duyuktuv not as a rule, but as a way of breathing. It governed relationships, justice, and even storytelling. In the council house, when disputes arose, the speaker's role was not to win, but to restore equilibrium. Truth was not a weapon, it was medicine. To lie or exaggerate would unbalance the world. So too with stories. Every tale carried moral weight, not through commandment, but through reflection. The stories of Selu and Kanadi were mirrors showing how life demands respect, how power without humility leads to ruin. The elders often told a story that followed Selu's myth, the tale of her sons, the Thunder Boys. After her death, the boys became wanderers, filled with remorse. They roamed the wilderness, trying to undo what they had done. One day they encountered a great serpent, the Uktena, a creature whose scales shimmered with fire. Uktena tempted them with promises of power. "Eat my heart," it said. and you will wield thunder itself." But the boys refused. They had seen what greed did to their mother. Instead, they prayed for forgiveness, and the Great Spirit took pity. A flash of lightning carried them to the sky, where they became the first thunder beings. Now they ride the clouds, bringing rain and renewal. Each storm is their cry of mourning for Selu, and each rainbow her forgiveness, bridging the realms of sky and earth. These stories were not seen as metaphors or inventions. They were truths in another form. The world of myth and the world of men were not separate realities but overlapping circles. When thunder rolled through the mountains, mothers would tell their children, "Selu's sons are weeping again." When corn grew tall, they whispered, "Selu has returned." In this way, memory became landscape. Every season reaffirmed that the divine lived close at hand, not in distant heavens, but in the rhythm of the land itself. Generations passed under that rhythm. The people expanded through the valleys of the Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas, establishing great towns along rivers whose names still bear traces of their language. Their trails wound like veins through the mountains, carrying trade, stories, and kinship across hundreds of miles. Yet through all the movement, the sacred geography remained constant. Kituwa, Nikwasi, Ekota, the axis points of their world. Even neighboring nations recognized the Cherokee as keepers of the fire. When other tribes came seeking counsel, it was said they traveled to the fire in the mountains. That fire symbolized not domination, but wisdom, a stable flame in an ever-turning world. It burned not for conquest, but for memory. When an elder died, the fire in their home was allowed to burn out naturally. Only after mourning could it be rekindled. This symbolized that every life is a spark of the eternal flame. It may dim for a time, but the source remains. Through fire, corn, and story, the people of Selu found immortality, and so, as the night fell over the valleys, the Cherokee continued to tell her story. The mother who became corn, the sons who became thunder, the people who became the sacred flame itself. The fire flickered across faces young and old, reflecting in their eyes like the light of a world that refused to die. The language, the soil, the stories, all were one breath, one heartbeat, one circle without end. Because for the Cherokee, the land is not merely where they live. The land is who they are. The Cherokee say that when you walk alone in the quiet of dawn, before the birds begin to sing, you can still feel Selu's spirit moving through the cornfields. The stalks tremble gently in the wind, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear her voice, soft, rhythmic, like the pulse of the earth itself. She does not speak in words, but in the rustle of leaves, in the whisper of seeds falling to soil. It is the sound of life being renewed. For the Cherokee, this renewal was the heartbeat of existence. Every sunrise marked a new promise between the people and the land, a silent covenant to honor the sacred balance that bound all things together. They believed that the Creator, Unitlanvi, did not govern through fear or commandment but through harmony. The Creator's law was not carved in stone. It was written in the curve of rivers, the flight of eagles, and the steady rhythm of the seasons. In this law, there were no true separations between spirit and matter. Every stone and every star shared the same essence, all flowing from the great mystery. When they spoke of the sacred fire, it was not only the flame burning in the council house, it was also the fire within every living being. It was consciousness, awareness, and gratitude made visible. Each ember that glowed in the night reminded the people of their connection to that divine spark. The sacred fire at Kituwa was tended by chosen keepers who watched over it day and night. It was said that if the flame ever died, darkness would fall upon the people. So the keepers guarded it not out of superstition, but reverence, because it symbolized continuity. No matter what storms came, no matter what changes swept across the land, the fire burned on, as constant as the mountains themselves. When the people traveled to new lands or founded new towns, they carried embers from that original flame to light their own hearths. In this way, every Cherokee home became an extension of the mother town, each family a reflection of the first circle around the sacred fire. Their homes were not merely shelters but living spaces infused with meaning. The architecture reflected harmony with the environment, circular council houses symbolizing completeness, open hearths connecting the human world with the spirit world. Smoke curling through the roof hole was considered a prayer rising upward. To live rightly was to maintain that invisible dialogue between earth and sky. In the hush of evening, when the shadows stretched long across the valleys, the elders would gather the children close and tell the story of beginnings again. Not because the young had forgotten, but because memory itself was a ceremony. Storytelling was prayer, and to tell of Selu was to invite her spirit to linger among the living. The old voices would rise with the crackling of fire, their cadence measured, deliberate, filled with reverence. Long ago, they would say, the world was darkness, but the people had faith, and they called to the Creator. From that darkness came light, and with the light came warmth. And from warmth, life began. Selu gave her gift of corn, Kanati gave the hunt, and together they formed the first balance. Woman and man, giver and seeker, nurture and need. Their story reminds us that creation is not a single act, but a promise renewed with every generation. This was not mythology in the modern sense, not distant or symbolic, but a living code of being. Every Cherokee understood that the story of Selu was also the story of themselves, the eternal pattern of giving and receiving, of loss and renewal. In every mother's hands planting seeds, in every father's fire-making, in every child's laughter as they ran through the fields, Selu's spirit endured. When drought came and the rivers thinned, the people did not despair. They sang to the thunder beings, offered prayers of cornmeal and tobacco, and waited. They understood that even hardship had its purpose. Suffering was not punishment, but instruction, a reminder to remain humble before the vast design. For in the Cherokee worldview, the earth was not a possession, but a relative. To injure her was to wound one's own soul. There was a profound peace in that way of life, a rhythm that pulsed through their daily existence. The world was not divided into sacred and ordinary. Everything was sacred, from the dawn mist to the footprints left on riverbanks. The songs sung at sunrise were the same that echoed at harvest festivals and funerals, invocations of continuity, of gratitude. Even today, when you visit those ancient homelands, the rolling hills of North Carolina, the misted valleys of Tennessee, the fertile plains of Georgia, you can still feel that presence. Archaeologists may speak of mound sites and artifacts, but the Cherokee speak of spirits that never left. They say Katua still breathes beneath its mound, its sacred fire glowing invisibly under the soil, waiting for the songs that once surrounded it. The story of Selu, though ancient, remains alive in modern ceremonies. Cornmeal is still sprinkled into the first furrow of the planting season. The people still turn their prayers eastward to greet the sun. And in Cherokee homes, the phrase, "the fire never dies," continues to echo, passed quietly between generations as both blessing and command. It is a reminder that the essence of life, sacrifice, renewal, gratitude, endures beyond time. So, when the last light of day fades over the ridges and the first stars appear above the Smokies, imagine that far below, in the hush of the valleys, a small fire still burns. Its flame flickers softly, casting long shadows across the earth that once fed a people who never forgot the meaning of balance. That fire is not confined to a single place. It burns in memory, in story, in every Cherokee heart that keeps faith with the old ways. The people of the sacred fire, Ani Yunwia, still walk the paths of their ancestors, still plant the seeds of Selu, still guard the embers that link them to creation itself. Their story, like the flame, has never gone out. And as long as corn grows in the fields and thunder rolls across the mountains, the spirit of Selu, the corn mother, will walk beside them, whispering through the wind, reminding all who listen that life itself is the gift that must forever be shared. To understand the heart of the Cherokee Nation, one must first understand the word duyuktuv, a word that holds no exact English translation. It means harmony, justice, the right way, balance. It is not simply a moral rule, but a living current that runs through every part of Cherokee life. To live duyuktiv is to live in rhythm with all things: the land, one's clan, the ancestors, and even one's own heart. The Cherokee believed that the universe itself was balanced upon this principle. Everything had its counterpart. Day balanced night, fire balanced water, man balanced woman, and joy balanced sorrow. When any one force grew too strong, the others rose to restore equilibrium. In this way, the people mirrored the cosmos. They built their society, their language, their laws, even their laughter, upon the understanding that balance sustains all life. At the center of this world stood the clans. The Cherokee were divided into 7 great clans, each with its own duties, symbols, and stories. The Wolf Clan, Aniwaya, were the protectors, warriors, and law enforcers. The Deer Clan, Anakawi, were swift messengers and hunters, their grace symbolizing connection between movement and mindfulness. The Bird Clan, Ani Tsiskwa, were spiritual communicators, said to carry prayers to the heavens. The Paint Clan, Ani Wodi, served as healers, using sacred colors and medicinal plants to restore health. The Blue Clan, Ani Sawadi, also practiced healing, focusing on cooling remedies and balance of the body's internal fires. The Long Hair Clan, Ani Galohi, were known as diplomats and peacemakers, their flowing hair symbolizing freedom and wisdom. And the Wild Potato Clan, Ani Gatogewi, were the cultivators and keepers of the earth's abundance. Each clan was a thread in the great web of Cherokee society. No one stood alone. Every person belonged to a network of kinship that defined their responsibilities and protections. Clan identity was matrilineal, inherited from the mother. A child belonged not to the father's clan, but the mother's. This reflected a profound spiritual truth. The earth gives life, as the mother gives life, and so the maternal line carries the sacred continuity of the people. Marriage rules reflected this reverence for balance. A man and woman of the same clan could never marry, for they were of one blood. Such unions would disrupt harmony and offend the ancestors. By marrying across clans, the Cherokee ensured that relationships formed bridges between families and communities. The social fabric became tightly woven, yet fluid. Strength through interconnection, not dominance. Leadership, too, followed the path of balance. The Cherokee had 2 forms of governance: the white, or peace, organization, and the red, or war organization. The white chiefs guided times of harmony, overseeing diplomacy, ceremonies, and justice. The red chiefs led in times of conflict, ensuring defense and strategy. Neither ruled alone. Each depended upon the other, for peace without protection invited danger, and war without wisdom bred destruction. When war ended, the white chiefs restored equilibrium, cleansing the warriors in sacred water ceremonies and calling for reconciliation. In every council, the fire burned at the center, a living symbol of unity. The speaker's role was not to command, but to mediate. Decisions were reached not by majority vote, but by consensus, for true agreement meant that balance had been achieved among all voices. Even the act of speaking carried spiritual weight. Words were considered living forces, capable of healing or harming. To speak carelessly was to throw the world off balance. Therefore, orators spoke slowly, their tone deliberate, measured, often poetic. They invoked the ancestors and the land, ensuring their words resonated with truth. The Cherokee language itself, Tsalagi Gawani Hizdi, reflects this worldview. It is a language of motion, of relationships, of verbs that connect rather than isolate. In Cherokee, one does not simply say, "I see a tree." The phrase implies relationship, something closer to the tree, and I are in the act of seeing one another. Every sentence is a web of reciprocity, acknowledging that all things participate in existence together. Even the way one greets another carries warmth and inclusion. Osio, a word that means more than hello. It means it is well, or there is harmony between us. Through their language, the Cherokee carried the rhythm of the mountains and rivers in their speech. Their words flowed like streams, filled with imagery drawn from the natural world. Mountains were the blue smoke places, rivers, the long singing paths. Their calendar followed the cycles of the moon, and their festivals marked the turning of seasons rather than arbitrary dates. Every linguistic rhythm reinforced the sense of living within a sacred pattern. The law, too, was bound to this pattern. Justice was not punishment, but restoration. When someone broke harmony, by theft, violence, or deceit, the goal was not vengeance, but correction. The offender must restore balance by compensating the victim through gifts, labor, or public apology. Only in cases of murder did retribution fall to the clan, for blood called for blood. Yet even then, mediation was possible if the families sought reconciliation. The council would oversee such matters, ensuring no lasting hatred remained to poison the community. Children were raised within this framework from their earliest days. They were taught not merely through instruction, but through example, observing their elders as they spoke, shared, and resolved disputes. A child who showed greed was gently reminded of Selu's story. Take only what you need, and the earth will continue to feed you. A child who quarreled was told, remember the 7 directions. Look above, below, and within before you speak. Moral education was a process of attunement, aligning the individual with the universal rhythm of life. In the evenings, families gathered around the hearth to tell stories that reinforced this sense of justice. Tales of tricksters like Rabbit and lessons from the animal world taught that cunning without kindness led to downfall, and that strength without humility destroyed itself. Through laughter and wonder, children absorbed the laws of Duyuktov. By the time they reached adulthood, they did not fear the law, they embodied it. The balance extended even into warfare. The Cherokee were skilled strategists and fierce when provoked, but they did not glorify battle. Before setting out, warriors underwent purification, fasting, bathing, and praying. They painted themselves with red, the color of life and protection, not aggression. Songs were sung to summon courage and focus the mind. When conflict ended, ceremonies cleansed them of death's shadow, restoring them to peace. To kill without purpose, or to fight from hatred, was a spiritual sickness. True strength lay not in conquest, but in the ability to return to harmony after chaos. At the center of all these practices stood one idea: that every choice, every word, every heartbeat contributes to the world's balance. To live well was not to avoid mistakes, but to correct them swiftly and with humility. To lead was to listen. To judge was to heal, and to speak was to honor both truth and beauty. The Cherokee saw the world not as a hierarchy, but as a circle. Everything that lived, breathed, or moved had its place in that circle, not above, not below, but alongside. This worldview shaped not only their spiritual practices, but also their politics, their art, and even their humor. To sit in a Cherokee council meeting was to witness democracy in its most ancient form. There was no throne, no elevated seat of power. The council house itself was circular, symbolizing the equality of all who entered. At the center burned the sacred fire, its 4 logs aligned with the cardinal directions: east, west, north, and south, each representing a spiritual force: east for peace and new beginnings, west for introspection and endings, north for cleansing and renewal, south for growth and warmth. The Speaker of the Council stood not as ruler, but as the voice through which balance flowed. When difficult matters arose, a boundary dispute, an accusation, a question of war, the council did not rush to decide. Elders from each clan spoke in turn, followed by younger voices, then the medicine people, then the women. The women's voices were especially powerful, for they represented the continuity of life. Their word could halt a war or restore a broken alliance. The men might lead in the hunt, but the women led the rhythm of society. It was said that the Cherokee do not fear the enemy half as much as they fear the tears of their women. This balance between the masculine and feminine was not merely symbolic, it was practical and spiritual. Women were the keepers of the land, the stewards of crops, the guardians of the hearth. Men were hunters, builders, defenders. But neither gender existed apart from the other's purpose. When the men returned from the hunt, it was the women who distributed the meat, ensuring fairness. When the women planted corn, the men blessed the soil with offerings of tobacco. Life was partnership, an ongoing dialogue between creation and action. The harmony of society depended on this dialogue. Even the language reflected it. Cherokee grammar often fused verbs and nouns so that actions and beings were never truly separate. To say, "the woman plants," was to describe a continuous act, not an isolated event. It implied that the woman and the earth worked together in motion. This is why, when Sequoyah later created the Cherokee syllabary in the 19th century, it was more than an invention of writing. It was a preservation of worldview. Each syllable, each symbol, captured a way of seeing the world where spirit and sound were inseparable. But centuries before Sequoyah, long before ink met paper, Cherokee wisdom was carried in memory, in story, song, and ceremony. The people learned through participation, through the repetition of ritual acts that mirrored cosmic order. Each season, they renewed their commitment to balance. The most sacred of these was the green corn ceremony, Anisala'idihi. It was both celebration and purification. When the first corn ripened in midsummer, villages gathered to thank the Creator for the harvest. Old fires were extinguished, symbolizing the burning away of the past year's mistakes. Then a new fire was kindled from a spark drawn from flint, pure, bright, and clean. Around it, the people danced, sang, and shared food in equality. No debt was remembered, no feud permitted. All were made new again. The festival reaffirmed what every Cherokee knew, that forgiveness is not weakness, but a return to Duyuktiv, to the rightful rhythm of the world. During this time, the Ugama, the spiritual leaders, would offer prayers to the four directions. Their words were poetry that wove together gratitude, humility, and reverence for the unseen powers that move through nature. The fire's smoke rose toward the heavens, carrying the people's thanks to the Creator. Children watched wide-eyed as the elders painted their faces with white clay, a symbol of purity. The young were told, "You must walk as the smoke rises, upward, straight, and free." The ceremonies also served as lessons in civic unity. Every person had a role: the singers, the drummers, the dancers, the cooks, the watchers of the fire. No one was idle. Even those who could not dance offered prayers or helped prepare the feast. The rhythm of the drum was said to echo the heartbeat of the earth. As the dancers circled the fire, their feet beat time with that ancient rhythm. To watch a Cherokee dance was to watch the nation's law in motion. Every step, every turn, a declaration that the people and the land were one body. From this foundation came the moral laws that governed daily life. There was no separation between religion, law, and custom. All were expressions of the same truth. Theft was forbidden not because of ownership, but because it broke relationship. To take what was not given was to take more than a possession. It was to disturb balance. Falsehood, too, was seen as a kind of theft, the stealing of trust. Thus, honesty was not only a virtue, but a sacred duty. Elders often told a story of the two wolves that live in every heart, one dark, one light. The dark wolf is anger, jealousy, greed, and arrogance. The light wolf is compassion, humility, and peace. When asked which wolf will win, the elder always said, "The one you feed." This teaching was not merely a parable of morality. It was a reminder that balance begins within the self. Each person is a small world, and the harmony of that inner world determines the harmony of the outer. In this sense, Cherokee law was deeply psychological, even philosophical. Wrongdoing was understood as imbalance, not evil. Healing began by identifying what force had grown too dominant, pride, fear, or grief, and bringing it back into proportion. Healers might prescribe fasting, prayer, or ritual bathing in the river. The water was believed to carry away disharmony, restoring the person to clarity. The rivers themselves were sacred judges. The people said, "The water knows truth." Before taking an oath, one might touch the water and speak one's words aloud to it, for lying in the presence of water invited misfortune. Many Cherokee ceremonies took place at dawn beside running streams, where the first light of day met the cleansing flow of water, symbolizing rebirth. Education followed the same principles. Children were taught to observe before they acted, to listen before they spoke. Learning was circular, not linear. The young learned by imitation, reflection, and repetition, the same rhythm seen in nature's cycles. No subject was separated from another. Medicine was part of spirituality, which was part of ethics, which was part of ecology. A single story might teach all three. For example, the story of Kanati and Selu, the first man and woman, was not just an origin tale. It was a lesson in balance between labor and gratitude, between the human and the divine. When their children disrespected the sacred way of hunting and growing, the abundance of food withdrew from the world. Only through repentance and remembrance did balance return. To be Cherokee was to live constantly aware of this delicate equilibrium. Every sunrise was a chance to begin again in harmony. Every mistake was an invitation to correct the imbalance. The world, they believed, was generous but watchful, always listening, always responding. The beauty of this philosophy lay in its quiet wisdom, that harmony cannot be forced, only cultivated. Justice was not handed down from above, but grown like corn, with patience, care, and shared responsibility. And just as the people tended their fields, they tended the balance of their society, believing that if they kept their hearts true and their fire burning, the Creator's light would never abandon them. By the early 19th century, the Cherokee Nation had built what many outsiders called a miracle of adaptation, a society that blended the old world and the new without losing its soul. They had written laws, established schools, published newspapers in both English and Cherokee, and built homes that stood firm against the changing times. They planted corn beside cotton, hunted the old trails while reading the new maps, and prayed to the Creator while negotiating with the government of the United States. To them, progress did not mean abandoning tradition. It meant carrying it forward into a new era. But the world beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains was changing too, and not in their favor. To the east, settlers hungered for land. Gold had been discovered in Georgia in 1828, on Cherokee land. Suddenly, the mountains that had been their sacred home for countless generations were seen not as a homeland, but as an obstacle to expansion. Politicians spoke of destiny, of progress, of manifest right, words that sounded noble, but concealed the shadow of greed. The Cherokee Nation appealed for peace through law. They took their case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, where in 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall declared that the Cherokee were a distinct political community whose rights must be respected. It was a victory of reason, of justice, but justice was powerless before politics. President Andrew Jackson, when told of the ruling, is said to have replied, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." And so, reason gave way to force. In 1838, under the Indian Removal Act, the U.S. government ordered the Cherokee to leave their ancestral lands and move west of the Mississippi River to what was called Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. Soldiers marched into Cherokee homes, forcing families out at bayonet point. The fires of their hearths, sacred since time immemorial, were extinguished. Children clutched corn kernels and bits of clay from their home soil. Elders prayed quietly as the soldiers burned fields and villages behind them. They called it Nuna Daul Tsuni, the trail where they cried. The people were herded into stockades, open-air prisons surrounded by guards. Disease spread quickly. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. The summer heat turned to cold autumn rain. Then winter came, hard and merciless. When the forced march began, more than 16,000 Cherokee, men, women, and children, set out on foot for a journey of nearly 1,000 miles. They walked through the mud, the snow, and the ice. Many were barefoot. The weak and sick fell by the roadside, and the soldiers pushed the others onward. Mothers carried infants in their arms until their strength failed. The elderly were lifted onto wagons, where they sat huddled beneath thin blankets. Frost formed on their eyelashes. Along the way, they buried their dead in shallow graves, often unmarked, for there was no time. Every few miles, the land received another soul. Entire families vanished into the wind. One survivor later said, "When we passed through a valley, we left behind us a trail of white stones. The stones marked not just death, but endurance. Because even as suffering mounted, the Cherokee spirit refused to break. Elders told stories by the campfires each night, reminding the people who they were. They spoke of Selu and Kanati, of the sacred fire that must never die. The women hid embers from their home fires in small pots, carrying them through the long march. When they finally reached the new land, they used those embers to light new fires, the same flame that had burned in their homeland. This act became more than survival. It became resurrection. Among the leaders who bore this burden was Chief John Ross. Though of mixed Scottish and Cherokee ancestry, he was wholly devoted to his people. He had spent years negotiating for peace, appealing to reason, to honor, to decency. And when all else failed, he walked the trail beside his people. His wife, Quadi, died of exposure along the way, having given her blanket to a freezing child. Her act of sacrifice became a symbol of the Cherokee heart. Love stronger than despair, compassion stronger than cruelty. As they trudged westward, the Cherokee carried not just their bodies but their memories, songs, names, medicines, and prayers. The songs they sang on the trail were quiet, mournful, yet steadfast. They sang to the mountains left behind, to the rivers that once carried their laughter. They sang to the Creator, not for deliverance, but for endurance. For the Cherokee, to keep singing was to keep living. When they finally reached the Indian Territory, nearly 4,000 had died. The survivors looked upon the unfamiliar land and wept. There were no familiar hills, no sacred rivers, no ancient mounds where their ancestors slept. Yet even here, in this strange soil, they began again. They built council houses, replanted corn, and rekindled the sacred fire. That fire, the one that had traveled hidden in clay pots through the dark winter, now blazed in the heart of the new Cherokee Nation. From this fire, they prayed again to the four directions. They gave thanks, even in grief, because gratitude was life. Their laws were rewritten, their schools reopened, their newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, published once more. Within a generation, they had rebuilt a society that many thought could never rise again. The people of the sacred fire had proven that though their bodies could be displaced, their spirit could not. The Trail of Tears remains one of the darkest chapters in American history, a wound that still bleeds in memory. Yet, in Cherokee tradition, even wounds can teach. They say that pain is a kind of teacher, and that those who walk through suffering without losing compassion gain a deeper wisdom. The Trail of Tears became, in this way, not just a story of exile, but a story of identity. It taught the Cherokee what it means to be a people bound not by land alone, but by heart, by story, by fire. Every generation since has carried that memory. It lives in the songs sung at dawn, in the language taught to children, in the corn that still grows under the summer sun. The fire still burns, not only in the ceremonial grounds of Oklahoma, but in every heart that remembers. When the Cherokee reached their new territory, the land seemed foreign, even hostile. The soil was dry and red, unlike the deep, rich earth of their homeland. The rivers moved differently, their sound unfamiliar. But the Cherokee had always been a people of adaptation. They knew how to listen to the land until it spoke back. Slowly, they learned its rhythm, where the good soil lay, when the rains would come, which herbs carried medicine. They learned again to speak with the earth, to make it part of them. They built their new capital at Tahlequah, naming it after a word that means two is enough, a reference to the two council fires of peace and war, now joined in unity. It was not just a town, but a symbol, a place where survival transformed into sovereignty. Here they rebuilt the council house, its circle once again centered on a sacred fire. Though far from their old mountains, the ritual remained unchanged. The fire was fed from the east, tended with humility, guarded as the living heart of the nation. The women of the tribe played a central role in this rebirth. They replanted the corn that Selu had given them, blessing the seeds before placing them in the ground. The corn did not grow as tall as it had in the homeland, but it grew, and that was enough. Each stalk that reached toward the sun was a testament to survival. The songs sung over the fields carried both sorrow and strength. They told the story of a people who had walked through death and still found the will to plant life again. Children, too, learned new songs. Around the fires at night, elders told the old stories so that memory would not fade. They reminded the young that to be Cherokee was not a matter of place, but of spirit. "The mountains are within you," they said. "You carry them wherever you walk." These words became a kind of prayer, a healing spell cast across generations. The trauma of removal lingered, as deep and unseen as roots beneath the soil. Many who survived carried silent pain, grief for family left behind, guilt for those who could not endure, and the quiet ache of disconnection. But even this grief became part of Cherokee strength. In their ceremonies, they gave space for mourning. Tears were seen not as weakness, but as sacred water that cleansed the soul. The trail of tears was not forgotten. It was sanctified through remembrance. The nation's leadership faced the impossible task of rebuilding identity in a new land while enduring the pressures of assimilation. The United States expected the Cherokee to abandon their language and customs, to become civilized in the image of the settlers. But the Cherokee knew that civilization was not measured by imitation, but by integrity. They built schools that taught both English and Cherokee, ensuring that their children could move between worlds without losing themselves. They re-established the Cherokee Phoenix newspaper, the first Native American publication, using the syllabary Sequoyah had created decades earlier. Through it, they spoke to one another across the distances of displacement, reminding every reader that the fire still burned. Faith, too, adapted. Some embraced Christianity, finding parallels between the suffering of Christ and the suffering of their own people. The story of a man who carried a cross up a hill resonated deeply with those who had carried their dead along the trail. Yet even as new beliefs entered their world, the old ones endured. The reverence for the earth, the sacredness of fire, the circle of balance. Many Cherokee quietly blended both, praying to the Creator under the names of both Yoah and God, seeing no contradiction between them. This ability to weave opposites together, ancient and modern, native and foreign, sorrow and hope, became the secret strength of the Cherokee. Where others saw loss, they cultivated renewal. Where others saw exile, they saw transformation. In the decades that followed, the Cherokee Nation rebuilt not only its villages, but its governance. A new constitution was written in 1839, affirming the sovereignty of the Cherokee people. It declared equality between men and women, justice based on balance rather than punishment, and education as a sacred right. Within a generation, the Cherokee Nation was again thriving, schools filled with children, fields heavy with corn, council fires burning at night. But even in this resurgence, the memory of the trail remained alive. It was spoken of not as history, but as blood memory, something that lives in the body, passed down through generations. Grandmothers told their grandchildren, "Do not let the tears dry in vain. Remember them, and you will never be conquered." The trail became not a scar, but a symbol, a reminder that identity is not bound by geography, but by endurance. In the early 20th century, when many tribes struggled under the weight of federal policy and cultural erasure, the Cherokee once again turned to their fire. They revived old ceremonies, re-established their language programs, and returned to traditional governance under new laws. Even as America modernized, the Cherokee refused to vanish into history. Their story continued to evolve, one of persistence, healing, and wisdom, hard-won through centuries of trial. The Trail of Tears had begun as a forced journey, but it ended as a pilgrimage of survival. It taught the Cherokee the cost of endurance and the price of memory. It revealed the strength hidden within suffering, the way sorrow can deepen love, the way displacement can teach belonging, and the way fire, though nearly extinguished, can flare anew when carried by faithful hands. Today, descendants of those who walked the trail still gather at its markers, retracing the steps of their ancestors. They sing the same songs, speak the same words, and light fires at dawn. The smoke rises eastward, toward the homeland they were torn from, but also toward the future they have claimed. For the Cherokee, survival is not just a historical fact, it is a sacred act. Each new generation inherits not only the memory of the trail, but the responsibility to keep walking with dignity, to keep the fire alive. As one elder once said, "The Trail of Tears did not end in Oklahoma. It ends only when we forget who we are." The generations that followed the Trail of Tears inherited not just land in the West, but a mission: to keep the Cherokee Nation alive in a world that constantly tried to define them out of existence. The 19th century gave way to the 20th, and the Cherokee people, though scattered across Oklahoma and beyond, carried within them a deep sense of unity. The nation that had once walked the long road of sorrow now began to walk a quieter, but equally difficult road of renewal. Elders often spoke of the fire that had survived the journey, the small ember carried in clay by Cherokee women, wrapped in hides, shielded from the wind and cold. That ember became a metaphor for everything the people held sacred. It symbolized not only survival, but continuity, the belief that as long as the fire burned, the Cherokee would never vanish. Each family, each community, tended its own version of that fire. Through storytelling, through teaching the language, through songs sung to children before sleep. And so, even when outside forces tried to extinguish it, the flame persisted. In the late 1800s, the U.S. government imposed harsh assimilation policies. Boarding schools were established where Native children were taken from their families, forbidden to speak their language, and forced to adopt the ways of white society. Cherokee children, like many others, were told that their traditions were pagan, their language inferior, their songs mere superstition. They cut the children's hair short, dressed them in uniforms, and punished them for speaking Cherokee. Yet in secret, the children whispered their words at night. They taught one another the prayers of their grandmothers, humming lullabies under their breath when the lights went out. In those quiet moments, the fire burned unseen but undiminished. A single whispered word, Ozda, good, Wado, thank you, Osio, hello, became an act of defiance, a spark of cultural resistance. The Cherokee also found resilience in adaptation. Some became skilled farmers and ranchers, mastering new forms of livelihood in Oklahoma's red soil. Others pursued education and leadership, becoming lawyers, teachers and activists who fought to protect their people's rights. They entered American systems not to be absorbed by them, but to bend them toward justice. One of the most profound symbols of this endurance was the Cherokee syllabary, Sequoiah's creation. His system of 85 characters had given his people literacy when many in the young United States were still illiterate. Even during removal and afterward, the syllabary survived, passed from hand to hand, carved into wood, inked onto paper, painted on walls. It carried with it not just words but worldview, the rhythmic, relational logic of the Cherokee mind. It was through this writing that the Cherokee Nation rebuilt its schools, re-established communication, and preserved identity when everything else had been stripped away. Every generation after the Trail of Tears has found its own way to rekindle the fire. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, when poverty and federal neglect hit hard, Cherokee families once again turned inward, drawing on the same resilience that had carried their ancestors across the Mississippi. They relied on each other, reviving community gardens, storytelling nights, and traditional crafts. They carved flutes, wove baskets, and built canoes from cedar. Each act was small, humble, but sacred, another thread in the endless weaving of Cherokee continuity. The post-war era brought new challenges. Urbanization and modernization pulled younger generations away from their roots. Many Cherokee families moved to cities in search of work, but even there, in brick neighborhoods far from the old fire circles, they carried their heritage with them. The stories of the Trail of Tears became bedtime tales, not of despair, but of strength. Children were taught, "We come from those who would not die." It was during this time that Cherokee leaders began to speak again of sovereignty, the right to self-govern, to define their own future. They reminded the world that the Cherokee Nation had signed treaties, established its own constitution, and never surrendered its identity. Slowly, through legal battles and cultural revival, the nation began to regain recognition and authority. The Cherokee Nation's government was formally restored in the 20th century, and a new generation of leaders emerged. Teachers, artists, historians, and visionaries who carried both the grief and the hope of their ancestors. Their message was simple yet profound. We are still here. Ceremonial fires once again burned openly across the land. Language programs blossomed, teaching children to speak the words their great-grandparents had whispered in secret. The green corn and friendship dances returned, their drums echoing through the same rhythms that once echoed in the mountains of North Carolina and the valleys of Tennessee. Elders stood before the young and told them, "This is how we remember, by living." The Trail of Tears, once a story of exile, became a sacred foundation for identity. It reminded the Cherokee that survival is not the absence of suffering, but the triumph of meaning over despair. The pain of that march had carved something indestructible into their collective soul: compassion, patience, endurance. Every year, Cherokee communities hold memorial walks retracing parts of the trail. They walk in silence, carrying torches or small bowls of flame. Some sing old songs, others pray. When dawn rises at the end of the walk, the firelight glows on faces both old and young, united across centuries of loss and renewal. Standing there, one can almost hear the voices of those who came before. The mothers who carried their children through snow, the elders who whispered stories to keep them alive, the men who refused to let the sacred fire die. Their voices blend with the wind, the rustle of leaves, the crackle of flames. It is as if the earth itself remembers, and through that remembering, the Cherokee continue to live. For every tear shed on that long trail, a seed was planted, a seed of strength, of continuity, of sacred duty. The Trail of Tears, though born of cruelty, became the soil from which the modern Cherokee Nation grew. It was proof that even in humanity's darkest moments, spirit can outlast empire. And so the Cherokee walk forward, carrying both their grief and their greatness, not as a burden, but as a flame. The story of the Cherokee people did not end with the Trail of Tears. It was only a chapter, a wound that bled but did not kill. The generations that came after found themselves standing in two worlds, one of memory and one of modernity. They lived in the echoes of ancestral songs while navigating highways, classrooms, and digital spaces. Yet, even in this transformed landscape, the same question lingered. What does it mean to be Cherokee today? In the 21st century, that question has found new answers. Not in museums or history books, but in living communities where language, art, and spirit are rising again. Across Oklahoma, North Carolina, and beyond, Cherokee people are restoring what the centuries tried to erase. The Cherokee language, once declared dying, is being spoken in homes, schools, and even on smartphones. The Cherokee Nation Language Department has created immersion programs where children learn to speak only in their ancestral tongue. In these classrooms, the sounds of Ozda Sunale, good morning, and Wado, thank you, echo not as relics, but as daily life. Elders who once feared their grandchildren would never know the old words now smile as they hear them sung in songs and playground laughter. The language, Sequoia's eternal gift, has become the heartbeat of revival, the living proof that the Cherokee soul cannot be silenced. But the restoration goes beyond language. It extends into art, spirituality, and governance. Across Cherokee country, artists are painting, weaving, carving, and writing stories rooted in both ancient and modern experience. They speak of survival not as tragedy, but as triumph, turning pain into beauty, memory into movement. In beadwork patterns, in baskets woven from river cane, in the smooth curves of a carved flute, the past lives anew. Cherokee spirituality, too, continues to evolve. The sacred fire still burns at ceremonial grounds like Katua, the mother town in North Carolina, where the people believe their first sacred fire was lit thousands of years ago. Every year, Cherokee families gather there for renewal dances, prayers, and offerings. The fire burns continuously through the night, fed with cedar and oak, as elders speak of the balance between earth, water, fire, and air. The same balance their ancestors sought before the coming of the Europeans. For many Cherokee, spirituality today is not confined to tradition or Christianity alone, but a blending, a harmony of both. They might attend church on Sunday and still join a stomp dance under the stars. In this way, the Cherokee identity remains fluid, yet rooted, open yet unbroken, just as it always was. Governance and sovereignty have also experienced a renaissance. The Cherokee Nation today stands as one of the most powerful and organized tribal governments in the United States. Its elected leadership oversees healthcare, education, and cultural preservation for over 400,000 citizens worldwide. The tribe operates hospitals, schools, housing programs, and economic enterprises, all while maintaining the spiritual foundation that defines its purpose: service to the people, balance with the earth, and respect for ancestors. Principal chiefs in recent decades have spoken not only of sovereignty, but of stewardship, the moral obligation to protect Cherokee lands, languages, and future generations. Environmental programs have been launched to preserve rivers, forests, and sacred sites. Seed-saving projects have reintroduced ancient Cherokee crops, such as white corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that sustained their ancestors. Each seed carries not just food, but memory. When Cherokee farmers plant them, they plant heritage itself. Technology, once seen as a force of assimilation, has now become a tool for revival. Young Cherokee creators use social media to share language lessons, traditional recipes, and oral histories. Online archives preserve old songs recorded by elders, while virtual reality projects allow youth to explore historic villages and trails in immersive detail. Even Cherokee artisans sell their handmade crafts globally, keeping traditions alive through modern means. The Cherokee story, in this way, has entered a new cycle, one of creative resilience. The trauma of removal has transformed into a collective vow. Never again will their identity be dictated by others. In 2019, for example, the Cherokee Nation exercised its treaty rights by nominating a delegate to the U.S. Congress, a right promised in an 1835 treaty, but ignored for nearly 2 centuries. The nomination served not only as a political statement, but as a historical reckoning. The descendants of those who walked the Trail of Tears were now walking into the halls of power. And yet, amidst all progress, there is a tenderness in the modern Cherokee spirit, a humility that remembers. Elders remind the young that the strength of their people was not born in victory, but in endurance. They tell stories of the women who carried fire across the snow, of the children who whispered songs in secret, of the men who stood unbroken when the world tried to erase them. Today's Cherokee youth inherit that legacy with pride. They grow up knowing that every word they speak in their language, every bead they thread, every dance they perform is a prayer of gratitude. They understand that their history is not a wound, but a bridge, connecting the ancient mountains of the East to the wide plains of the West, connecting past sorrow to present strength. Modern Cherokee identity is not about purity of blood or geography, but the purity of purpose, the commitment to remember who they are. Whether they live in Tahlequah, Tulsa, Atlanta, or abroad, Cherokee people carry their nation in their hearts. The sacred fire, once carried in clay and ash, now burns in digital screens, community centers, and the quiet conversations of grandparents teaching grandchildren how to say Wado. It burns in songs at the stomp ground, in policy meetings where leaders fight for their people, in classrooms where the next generation learns to count in Cherokee. It burns in the laughter of children running through the same red Oklahoma soil their ancestors once walked in sorrow. In that laughter, the Trail of Tears is not forgotten. It is redeemed. For the Cherokee, survival was never simply about existing. It was about remembering the sacred pattern of balance between past and future, grief and joy, human and earth. The fire they carried across the Mississippi was not just physical. It was the eternal flame of identity. And today, that fire burns brighter than ever. The Cherokee Nation stands not as a relic of history, but as a living testament, proof that a people can endure unspeakable loss and still rise with dignity, language, and love intact. Their story is not only a Cherokee story, it is a human story, a reminder that even when the world takes everything from us, we can still choose to carry the flame forward. As the camera of time pulls back over the ancient Blue Ridge Mountains, through the mist of the Oconaluftee River and across the plains of Oklahoma, the story of the Cherokee Nation feels like a great circle closing in light. A people once scattered now stand connected again, not by geography, but by spirit. The sacred fire, first kindled in the mythic dawn when Selu fed her family with her own body, now burns in the hearts of hundreds of thousands. The Cherokee have walked through eras of abundance and loss, through cornfields and courtrooms, through song and silence. But through every turn, one truth has endured: that fire cannot die if it is tended with memory. In the time before the trail, when the world was still wide with forest, the Cherokee saw the land as alive. Every stream had a voice, every hill a presence, every tree a story. The people did not own the land. They were woven into it. Today, that understanding is returning. Modern Cherokee environmentalists, spiritual leaders, and storytellers speak again of reciprocity, of giving back to the soil, of replanting what was taken, of listening once more to the rivers. To the Cherokee, balance has always been the law of creation. They call it Duyuktiv, the path of harmony, the middle way. It means more than peace. It means right relationship with everything, with people, with animals, with the invisible forces that move between them. When this balance is broken, suffering follows. When it is restored, life flourishes. That lesson feels more urgent today than ever. In a world fractured by division, disconnection, and greed, the Cherokee worldview offers a different compass, one that points not to conquest, but to communion. It teaches that progress without reverence is hollow, and that survival without meaning is no survival at all. The sacred fire, which once burned in clay bowls at the center of each village, now burns as a symbol of continuity. It is tended not only by priests and elders, but by every Cherokee who chooses to live with awareness of their origins. To feed that fire is to remember not only who they were, but who they still are. And this remembrance extends beyond the Cherokee themselves. It reaches out to all who hear their story, inviting us to ask, what fires have we forgotten? What roots have we lost? What balance have we broken with the earth and each other? The story of the Cherokee Nation is not one of nostalgia, but of prophecy. It reminds humanity that culture is not something to be preserved like a fossil. It must be lived, sung, spoken, planted, and passed on. In every Cherokee ceremony, when the fire is lit, tobacco and cedar are offered to the flames. The smoke rises, curling into the blue air, carrying prayers to the Creator. The people gather in a circle, children, elders, men and women together, moving to the rhythm of drums that echo the heartbeat of the earth. Their feet strike the ground in unison, the same ground that once bore their ancestors through pain and exile. In those moments, the centuries collapse. The Trail of Tears becomes not only a memory of sorrow, but a foundation of strength. The myth of Selu becomes not only a tale of the past, but a pattern of the present. The truth that life demands sacrifice, that the greatest gift is to give of oneself for others. Selu gave her body so her children could live. The generations who carried fire across the wilderness gave their endurance, so their descendants could rise. And today's Cherokee give their creativity, their wisdom, and their compassion to ensure that the sacred fire never fades. When you hear a Cherokee child speak their first words in the ancestral tongue, you are hearing the fire whisper. When you see an elder teaching beadwork beside a laptop, you are watching the fire glow. When a song in Cherokee language fills a digital classroom across oceans, you are witnessing the fire reborn. The sacred fire has always been both literal and spiritual, the meeting point between the visible and the unseen. It is the warmth of community, the courage to endure, and the clarity of balance. And as this story draws to its close, that fire flickers before you too. It asks nothing but awareness, that you remember the people of the sacred fire, not as victims of history, but as teachers of resilience, balance, and devotion. They have shown that strength is not domination, but endurance. That survival is not stubbornness, but faith. That identity, when carried in truth, can outlast every empire that seeks to erase it. The Cherokee continue, in song and in silence, in ceremony and in technology, in Oklahoma wind and Carolina rain. Their name itself, Tsalagi, is a sound of movement, of continuity. It is said that at the heart of the Cherokee spirit lies gratitude, Watto, gratitude for corn, for river, for family, for memory, gratitude for the fire that never died. So as the last embers of this story fade, imagine the sacred fire still burning, glowing softly against the darkness, whispering across generations. We are still here. We are still sacred. We are still one with the fire. And somewhere, in the hush of an autumn evening, as the wind rustles through oak and pine, a Cherokee elder may still lift their eyes to the stars and speak the words that have carried their people for millennia. The fire lives, the people endure,